The thing we fear the most in our drinking becomes our superpower.
I knew for me the only option going forward was sobriety. That's my term. But there's also a lot of people that are like, you know what, maybe I could cut down because I could maybe perform better in my sport, or I have a marathon coming up.
When we make the decision to stop drinking, that is either one of two destinations. That's either sober or that's alcohol-free living. So sobriety is the pursuit of personal development for the purposes of building a life that we don't need to numb out from, where we learn about boundaries, we learn about self-worth, we learn about self-care, we learn about who we are, what we want, how we want to be spending our lives, completely separate from our environment, our expectations, our culture, our society, all of that stuff. Who are we in relationship to us in the world in which we live? Right now, She Walks Canada is in its third year. And She Walks Canada launched in 2022 as a reflection of what worked for me in my journey to overcome overdrinking. And when I was ready to quit this time, which was my 7th time I tried, something just clicked for the first time on January 24th, 2020 in my kitchen at 6 a.m. And even though there was that click and there was a feeling that I had really reached my doneness, I was ready to make a change, I still felt very alone and very disengaged from what I wanted for my life. But I didn't identify with traditional pathways. I didn't identify with traditional wisdom or conventional wisdom. And so I just had to start my own path. And that path was walking every day and connecting with other women who were totally unknown to me, but were on the same journey. And it was the combination of walking and finding other women who were on the same sober path that allowed me the space to process my own path, really. And so She Walks Canada, when I launched, was launched with the intention to provide an opportunity for women who were having the same need to change their relationship with alcohol, but to do it in a way that was more open, more inclusive, more sort of less stigmatic, but more based on community and connection. And so when we first launched, I'll never forget it. It was in January, which is a great time to launch a sober movement. But it was during COVID when our premier had announced that all schooling was to be shut down again. And so all moms, because my community is women, were going to be, after Christmas, going back into homeschooling. Russia had just invaded Ukraine, and there was a truck convoy going across Canada. And I remember saying to my team, what woman in her right mind would choose this time to stop drinking, right? But we had to launch anyways. Because as we know, for those of us who have problematic relationships with alcohol, nobody goes from first drink to completely addicted. Like when we're dealing with alcohol, there is a progression there. And so if we can plant seeds, then that's how the process starts. And so She Walks Canada, now in its third year, building on the success of our first year walking across Canada 3 times in 7 months, which was insane during COVID, where we could only do it virtually. And then the second year with circumnavigating the globe in 94 days is also insane. By that point, we had impacted 3,000 women. And so right now our movement is over 10,000. And we are, for the first time, walking in the community. So right now, She Walks Canada is getting ready to walk over 200 walks between March 17th and June 16th across North America. And we will take every woman along with us who wants to come.
I love that. And I love the fact that so you embarked on your own journey of sobriety and you found this thing that helped and worked for you, but then you kind of gifted that to 3,000 other women or to all of these other women by creating this. I'm wondering, what is the biggest takeaway for women that join? Like, what is it that you hear from them in terms of joining these walks, being a part of this organization and working with you?
For sure. the feedback that I get back from our community is that the two things actually. On Instagram, I share my thoughts, feelings, ideas, and methodologies really around overcoming overdrinking. And I think it's in that inclusive narrative and the use of evolutionary language that is opening the door for women who are in the mild to moderate stage of dependency, where they're able to ask themselves the questions without being spoon fed or jam fed the idea that they need to go to AA or they need to go to a treatment program. And there's no shade against those programs at all because they are effective. However, they are not reflective of the spectrum of support required to deal with this health issue. And in order for us to get to the early onset or mild to moderate dependency, we have just got to speak a different language. And so I think it's the connection that women feel with the language of what I'm offering, added to the coaching calls that we have Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday night, where you're surrounded by other women who are going through the same thing, who, while we may be completely unique from each other, our themes and situations are quite common. So there's connection and community and coaching, which is what I offer.
And if you take us back a bit, so you got to this point in your life where you decided, like, I need to get sober. Can you explain a bit about like what that moment was like? Because I think we went over it real quick, and I think that it can be a big moment.
It is.
And even like, I mean, I think there's also, I have this notion or this idea. There's a lot that leads up to you before you even have that first drink, and why you might have this affinity towards alcohol. And like you said, it is a progressive disease, and so more often than not, we're kind of working on maybe it's previous traumas, family issues, mental health issues, and that's really the foundation and the source of the issues. And then alcohol is just that way to manage it. So if we could go back a bit, tell us a bit about, that moment when you decided to get sober, but even going back further and telling us a bit about your origin story.
Sure. So just as a clarification, I don't refer to it as a progressive disease. It is a disorder by clinical terms. But yes, it is progressive. So my situation is, and this is going to sound funny, but it's such a blessing, totally garden variety. Like there's nothing really that special about my situation. I've come to learn, and I was shocked when I discovered this, but it is in the research, that the majority of women who have developed a problematic relationship have had that problematic relationship in progression for 10 to 12 years. And I fit squarely into that timeline. And when I learned that, I started thinking, well, what was I doing 10 to 12 years ago? What led up to it? And I think, I don't really, like, there was no big event and that's pretty consistent for me. There's never been a big rock bottom in anything, but there has been a progression or an evolution. And I remember often feeling quite alone, that I felt like that many, many times in my life. And I think, while we need to be able to be alone with ourselves, too much alone time is too much alone time. And we can get stuck in that. And I think in my fears and insecurities about my abilities in various fields, particularly in my singing when I was back in the opera days, or as a young woman, or anything, I often questioned my skill, my worth, my being, and I think that was quite normal. But that, coupled with this nature that I often spent too much time alone, I think those two things put together over time, times life experience, and as we get older, things get more complicated. It leads to a perfect storm. Right. So on January 24th, 2020, I woke up at 6 a.m. after a very average drunk fest the night before. And I had tickets to go and see the Phantom of the Opera. And I knew some people on the show. And I bought these tickets with the intention to go with a friend of mine. But at that time, I should say the 6 months leading up to when I quit, things really spiraled quite a bit at that time. So I was particularly special during that 6 months. And so as I bought these tickets to go with a friend, without consulting with the friend, if the friend wanted to go, when the friend was available, those details. And so I assumed that this was all going to be fine. And so I went and got these tickets, and then I told my friend, this is where we're going. And I said, no, I can't do that. I'm like, what? And I got upset about that. And so I phoned another mom friend, and I said, we're going out. And so before we even went for dinner, I had 2 bottles of wine, and then we drank when we were there. And, I don't remember how I got home. All the things, that happen. And so, yeah, that's silly. But so nothing bad really happened that night, except when I got up at 6 a.m. after having the nightly 3 a.m. shame game, which so many of us have. And there's actually a medical reason for that. But anyways, I remember walking into my kitchen in my robe with a terrible headache and just loathing myself, because that's what it was at that time. Is every morning I would wake up and hate myself, really. And I went into my kitchen and I stood there and I called out all the things in my kitchen that I hated. I hate that teacup. I hate that tea towel. I hate that coffee machine. And after the third one, I paused because I couldn't believe how many times I had said, I just woke up. And I was calling out all these things in my kitchen that I hated. And I didn't know where that came from. And so I paused. And then I realized that I had put all of those things there. And I paused. And I thought, okay, if I can put all of those things there, I could unput all of those things. And I never drank again after that, because I knew what needed to be done. See, that's the thing, is that we know what needs to be done, but we don't take that step for a variety of reasons. We don't know what it's going to look like on the other side. We don't know if we even want that. We don't know if we want to work that hard. We don't know if we want to change. We don't know what that change will mean. What are we going to lose if we make that change? But for me, I just knew that if I didn't make that change, that I was going to lose everything.
And I think that's the thing, is that change is hard. There's always the unknown with change. And so to then voluntarily, make an effort to make a big change in your life, it's really, really hard, which is why I think people hit, what we refer to sometimes as rock bottom, or what I call like this pivotal moment, the moment where we decide to make a change. But it takes something, bad, hard, or we're just exhausted from the way that we're living to then make that. You said something about a medical reason in terms of that shame game at 3 a.m. Can you explain that a bit?
Yeah, it's when the liver processes alcohol or whatever is in our system, and it's at 3. And so that's when there's a process happening.
Interesting.
I know. I was like, what?
Makes a lot of sense, because it was always 3 a.m. for me.
Yeah, well, no, but that's the thing. It's like, that's what I couldn't believe when I was talking with these other women when I was very, very, very early in my sober days. I remember saying something about, I got up at 3 a.m. And then another one said, I got up at 3 a.m. And every single one of us was getting up at 3 a.m. I'm like, what is happening? And I didn't look into it. I didn't know that you can do research. There's just so much I didn't know at the time, but then over time, these facts reveal themselves.
Right. And so you made that decision. Did you have to go through a process of did you decide, okay, I'm going to let all my friends know, my family know, I have to sit down and have this conversation right away to hold myself accountable? Or what did that look like for you?
Mm-hmm. So because this was the 7th time that I tried, I had a track record of being unsuccessful. I had a track record of failure, as I called it. And so there was absolutely no way I was going to set myself up to reveal again that I was a failure. So I didn't talk about it. And it was funny because I didn't even talk about it with Craig. And, you know, we lived together. And so, and I remember being downstairs in our old house. I was taking out the garbage. We lived in a townhouse, and he was in the basement, I don't know, or garage. I don't know what he was doing, but I was taking out the garbage, the recycling. And I remember this because the bottles weren't clanking, and I was proud of myself. But it was 10 days alcohol free. But I was in very rough shape because the withdrawal for me was tough, was rough. And so the first while was very difficult. And I remember Craig said to me, "What is wrong with you?" And he wasn't being a jerk. He's just like, "I don't understand who this is right now." And I said, "I'm an alcoholic and I'm in rehab." And he said, "You're not an alcoholic." And I said, "You're not an expert on my experience." And he said, "How can I help?" And I said, "Don't bring red wine into the house." That was the conversation. And it's so funny because that conversation was such a metaphor for how everything unfolded after. Because, and this is true, and I believe that our purpose in alcohol-free living is revealed to us in the moments we remember once we stop. And in the app, which we'll talk about later, I talk about that. But why that conversation was so important is because when I just fired at him, I'm an alcoholic and I'm in rehab. And I've already said I didn't identify with that language, but I didn't know there was other language. And at the time, there wasn't a lot of other language being used. And I wasn't in rehab, but I had this mindset that there was some kind of rehabilitation that needed to happen. And then when he said, "You're not an alcoholic," which is what so many people say to try to ease the situation for their reasons, for our reasons, I'm like, "You're not an expert on my experience." And to me, that was the first time that I'd ever stood up to a man. So what is that all about, right? And then he backed down and said, "How can I help?" And I said, "Don't bring red wine into the house." And that was the first time I asked for what I needed.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
Because so I think that can definitely keep us stuck. So my experience with my drinking had got to a point where I kind of knew it was bad because it started to impact different things in different parts of my life. I started waking up with like horrible anxiety. Like it was making things worse, and then it was just getting worse, right? I had to consume more alcohol to feel better, to feel normal.
Right.
And when I had been in a relationship at that time, I was engaged, and my fiance said to me, "You're not an alcoholic. You don't have a problem." And yeah, and I had always defined alcoholism by like what I call A&E content because I grew up watching like the show Intervention, and there was people like down and out. They lost their jobs. You know, there's that typical sitting under a bridge drinking out of a brown paper bag. And so I was none of those things. And that was validated and reinforced by all of the people around me saying, "You're not an alcoholic." How did you like find that kind of within yourself? And maybe we can also discuss a bit about this notion of like alcoholism, living alcohol free versus being sober curious versus being sober. Like we have so many terms now, and I think that can be helpful because now people have more to choose from when it comes to defining where they are at. But just wondered if you had an opinion about that, or like what your thoughts were around those naming conventions that now exist.
Right. And absolutely I do, because one of the things I focus on is language evolution and inclusionary language. So this is the deal. Alcoholism is no longer a word that is current and correct. It's alcohol use disorder. And the reason for that is because in the grand scheme of human condition research, addiction is a baby. And so what we know about addiction and dependency, and those two things are different, is that the severity of this issue lies on a spectrum. It is not black and white. It is not no problem with alcohol or dude underneath the bridge drinking out of a paper bag. Like 80% of problematic drinkers lie in the gray area, yet before, there was no terminology for that. So further to what you said, of course, you said, I'm not an alcoholic, because there was no language around that. The language before was either this or that. And so you got a whole boatload of people that are saying, I'm not this or that, so I don't have this because I'm not that. So first of all, the term alcoholism is not current correct terminology. It's alcohol use disorder, because it is reflective of the spectrum of the issue from mild to severe. Okay. With the term alcoholic, that is a term of opinion. That is not a clinical term. However, it is a term that is used in clinical practice by some individuals today. However, it is important to note that the term alcoholic is very useful when used in its context, which is, for example, within 12-step programming. And so it makes a lot of sense in that context. Taken out of that context, it loses its effectiveness, because so much shame surrounds that word out of context. So we don't use that word. And so I respect people, for example, who do go through 12-step programming and use that language, because that's their language. Use it. It makes sense. But that doesn't mean that that language is going to resonate with, for example, the 80% who are gray area drinkers.
And when we think about those gray area drinkers, there's like sobriety, right? Like I would consider myself sober. And because for me, so to your point, my drinking I had gone sober for a year. I relapsed, and it was a full relapse. And I actually went to CAMH. And there they asked me those questions. And they basically put me on that spectrum of alcohol use disorder, and whether or not it was like moderate, severe, etc. And so with that, like knowing myself and then getting that validation from doctors saying like, this is pretty severe, I knew for me, the only option going forward was sobriety. Like I couldn't moderate. I generally can't moderate in any way in my life. Like everything I do 110%. So for me, like I know that like sober and like sober, that's my term. But there's also a lot of people that are like, you know what, maybe I could cut down because I could like maybe perform better in my sport, or I have a marathon coming up and I want to, just be better at what I do career-wise, etc. And so maybe they're sober curious. Can you define a bit of that? And then what is this new term, alcohol-free?
Yeah. So first of all, there are a boatload of reasons why people get sober or have moments of sobriety. For people like you and I, it's because we need it to be. But we need to recognize that there's a lot of people who make that choice for a variety of other reasons. I have a marathon coming up. You know what? I'm pushing 50 and I notice my body isn't responding as well. So there's all kinds of reasons why people choose to either take a break or to stop entirely altogether. For folks like us, it's because we had to, right? So, so I think about these terms in this way. And bottom line is you've got to use language that resonates with you. And the only reason why I say you've got to is so that you can talk about and describe your experience. And it's in the talking about and describing your experience that we release shame. So that's why I say that's why you've got to have the language around it. But so I'm just putting that out there, because I don't believe that labels are effective unless they're useful. And they're useful when we talk about and explain our experience. So having said that, sober curious I think it's a beautiful place to be, where we recognize, for whatever reason, that perhaps there's a better way to live. And so whether we want to question our relationship with alcohol for health reasons, like you were just mentioning about some other people, or for folks like us, we're like, okay, we got a problem and this is negatively impacting my life and the lives of people around me. So sober curiosity is the active pursuit of knowledge, where we're learning about other options that will help us live the life that we want to live. So that's what sober curiosity is. And people can be sober curious anywhere from 3 months to a year usually is what's going on. I question a little bit why somebody would be sober curious for longer than a year. But that's not on me to make that judgment. But I just have noticed those that are serious. Usually it's like 6 months or something like that. And then when we make the decision to stop drinking, that is either one of two destinations. That's either sober or that's alcohol-free living. I'll get to alcohol-free living in a minute. So sober is for folks like you and I who needed to change our relationship with alcohol, because we know that it's either alcohol or not. We know that we cannot moderate. And so sobriety is the pursuit of personal development for the purposes of building a life that we don't need to numb out from. And I'm often asked, how long does it take to get sober? And that is a question that is so unique. The response is so unique to every individual, but that's years. Like, that is not a week, that is not a month, that is not 3 months, that is not 6 months. That is why I have a bit of an issue with 30-day challenges, sober October, dry January, because those are set up for people who don't have a problematic relationship. Those are not set up for people who have a problematic relationship. So there's that beautiful sobriety piece where we learn about boundaries. We learn about self-worth. We learn about self-care. We learn about who we are, what we want, how we want to be spending our lives, completely separate from our environment, our expectations, our culture, our society, all of that stuff. Who are we in relationship to us in the world in which we live? That's what sobriety is. For me, I do not believe that that is the ultimate destination. I don't believe our purpose with people who have a drinking problem, I don't believe our purpose is to get sober. I think our purpose is to live alcohol-free. And what that means is complete freedom from even thinking about needing to drink. I don't believe that the opposite of being addicted or dependent is sober. The opposite is freedom. And so I think about it like, in sobriety, we build a life that we don't need to numb out from. But I think we need to go to the next stage where we build a life we don't need to be sober from, because that is the ultimate freedom.
I love that you said this, because one thing that comes up time and time again in kind of my sober community. So I'm on the I Am Sober app, and I like connect with a little community there. And a lot of the things I see people post about is like, I got sober 30 days ago, 60 days, 90 days ago, and like nothing's getting better. And like, this is so, so hard. Mm-hmm. And then even in my own experience, when I got sober, so about 4 years ago, I did a year. And that year, like, okay, moderation doesn't exist in my vocabulary. And so I went all in on sobriety. Like, I read all the books, I listened to all the podcasts, I did all of the things. And then when I hit a year milestone, I was exhausted from, and I think this is kind of like what you're saying, where it's like, I was like so invested, I was overdoing it, and I wasn't able to be free from this anymore. It was just this new hold on me that alcohol had. And so, yeah, I think like with that, kind of what advice would you have for folks that are embarking on this? Like, how do they moderate their sobriety even? Like, or even like, how do you, when you're talking to the people that you work with, like, how do you encourage them to keep on going, that it gets better, right? Like, there's a big notion around like, just keep going, it'll get better. Mm-hmm. But does that take some sort of work or effort, or does it just magically get better?
Okay. So there's so many parts to this question. So I just want to talk about willpower. I want to talk about 6 months. And I want to talk about leaning in. So willpower, here's the thing, is that so many people in it or out of it have this notion that you've got to have willpower to stop drinking. And willpower has nothing to do with stopping drinking. Willpower is white knuckling your way through the experience. I'm just not going to drink today. I'm just not going to drink today. And the willpower narrative ends up being things like, why can't I drink like a normal person? You know, all of my friends are out drinking and I just have to sit here and like not drink. Like, why is this my story? That is what willpower and white knuckling looks like. if we are going to get to the other side of over drinking, we need to lean into commitment. Learning to live alcohol free is not about willpower. It is about commitment. And what that means is you got to lean into the emotional situation, discomfort, whatever you want to call it, that is coming for you, that you've been sweeping underneath the rug for however long that is. And you have to look at your memories in the eyes and say, I'm going to sit with you in this, and we're going to figure this out. And you have to stay brave, and you have to stay in it. And if you do that in the company of other women, for example, who are doing the same thing, you will at least have an easier go of it. And that is the difference between willpower and commitment. You have to commit to yourself that you're going to continue to show up, and you're going to continue to have the courage to look at what happened in your life. If you're not going to do the personal development side, sure, you can get sober, but there's no joy in that. Zero joy. And this is the thing, is that we don't get sober to learn how to deal with trauma better. We get sober to learn how to deal with joy better. At 6 months, so this is the thing, like everybody's situation is different. But for me, and apparently, again, garden variety, the first month for me was very difficult because of the withdrawal. I can't say that in any other way. And if I said another way, I'd be lying. So with full transparency, it was difficult. And then in the first 3 months, it really was, I'm not going to drink today. I'm not going to drink today. I feel like I want to drink, but I'm not going to drink. So I've just got to figure out how I'm going to get through this tough situation I'm feeling right now. But at 6 months, it was like a little snowflake of awesome fell at 6 months. And then the very next day, it was like a snowfall of awesome. And then the very next day, I was throwing snowballs. And the very next day was an avalanche, and the world opened up after that. And it's not to say that life doesn't still happen. Things are still going to happen that are bad things in our lives, but they don't have nearly the hold and traumatic impact because we have gotten better in how to deal with it.
Yeah, and that takes time to develop that, especially if, and I think we talked about this before we started filming, like if you've lived most of your life kind of wearing this mask or having this shield up, and now all of a sudden, like, and then alcohol supported some of that because then you could show up socially in a certain way or continue, just eased what the weight of carrying that mask was. Then to get rid of the alcohol and now have to face yourself and face everything that's under that, that doesn't happen in 30 days, right? That takes some time. And so, and that's what I try to say even to the people that I connect with on a regular basis is like, that's what takes time. And it's not, like you said, the white knuckling or just like putting down the drink and waiting for it to happen. I think another thing is, so like there's this notion of like gifts of sobriety. You roll your eyes.
No.
Okay.
That was there's so many.
Okay, good. Okay, yeah. There's a lot, but okay, so I have a question about this. Because there's this notion of gifts of sobriety, and I could sit here and spend the next hour and tell you about like so many things for me that have happened. But to some people, they're not going to seem like a lot. Because for me, it's like gratitude. This moment here, having this conversation, finding joy in those little moments. Andrew Huberman says that his definition of addiction is the gradual narrowing of things that bring you joy. And I do enjoy that because like now everything makes me happy, but they're little things. And I think though, within whether or not you believe this like addict personality or mindset, I thought I would get sober and then I'd like fall into a relationship, like, and it would be the best relationship ever. I'd get the house, I'd get the car, I'd get the job. Like I'd get all these big superficial material things that probably wouldn't bring me joy anyways. But so I guess, how do you view that, like these gifts of sobriety? And then I do want to get into a bit about like, you have to get out of your comfort zone to grow. And a piece of that for me and a lot of people I talk to is like sober dating. Like, okay, I'm sober and I want to like get into a relationship, but like those things are a big deal, and getting out of your comfort zone is a big deal too. But we can get into that. But first, yeah, gifts of sobriety. Like, what does that mean and represent for you?
When I was drinking, well, we all have narratives, right? And so when I was drinking, my narrative on repeat was, I'm a has-been that never was. And I have come to learn that the thing that we feared when we were drinking, but we didn't have the acknowledgement because we never really asked ourselves, but in reflection, the thing we fear the most in our drinking becomes our superpower when we learn to live alcohol free. And so these are the things that I said to myself when I was drinking. I'm a has-been that never was. My life will never have meaning. I will never have impact. And I will live a plain, simple, unseen life. I had absolutely no idea what I was signing up for when I stopped drinking, because it was in one of those desperate relief moments. I just didn't, I needed to make the choice to stop, but I had to do that blind. What has transpired over 4 years is so far beyond what I ever would have hoped for myself. And it is so very different than what I thought it could be. So like behind you right now that people can't see is my vision board for 2024. And when I was preparing that, I just didn't think that any of that, as I'm looking at it now, would be possible. So the gifts of sobriety for me have been a reveal of capability, capacity, humanity, humility. I had no idea that I thought my life was supposed to be telling a different story. And I had to let go of the story I thought would be mine. And it's the letting go of the dream I thought my life would be about, and the grief associated with that letting go, that I'm able to step into who I'm meant to be.
I have a question about that. So I know that at one point you had a career as a performer, as an opera singer. Was there anything, so what you're saying in terms of like, was there anything that you had to contend with when that changed for you and your life then went in another direction, and you realized that wasn't something that you were going to pursue anymore?
I lost my opera career in 2013, and I stopped drinking 2020. Again, to speak to that time frame that so many of us have, it takes a long time to make the decision to stop. But so many of us have to deal with shame when we stop drinking, because when we are no longer numbing out from our experience, we remember the things that we've done, or half remember the things that we've done. And it's grieving. It's a very special kind of grief when we have to grieve the things that we've lost, that we loved, because of our own actions. That's a tough grief. Another tough grief is realizing that those things are never going to come back. But when we are able to have the courage to grieve those things, we recognize that those things were never meant to be the story we're meant to tell. Those things were the setup. So we think those things are the setback, but really they're the setup.
Yeah, and I think that's been definitely a piece of it for me. And I think even going back to kind of my initial question around the gifts of sobriety, and for me, assuming that those looked like physical things, like the career, like the relationship, like, yeah, I think that sobriety is so powerful because when you do focus on the self-development piece and this growth piece, you redefine all of that. And so there is some grief of letting go what your life used to be, or even what those goals were at one point. But there's something freeing in doing that. And there's something powerful about being able to redefine that and redefine that direction that is more aligned to what is meaningful to you. I want to go into this question. So I get a lot of questions about sober dating. A lot. And like, and everyone's like, okay, like, what are the rules? Like, okay, so I think in AA, they say in your first year, don't date. Like, you're not allowed to date for that first year. And then after a year, fine, do what you want. So there's some rules around it. There's some cautions, like, but I think that, and I had initially said, like, so sober dating, but then also getting out of your comfort zone. So anything you have to share on sober dating would be helpful, I think, for a lot of people listening. But then also, I think a part of this is balancing what risks to take in sobriety. And that probably lives on a spectrum of, like, are you a month sober or 5 years sober? Because I think getting out of your comfort zone can be powerful in growth, right? Like, to help you grow. But when you take those risks and what those risks are, and I'm calling dating a risk, but it is, because it takes a lot emotionally. Yeah, so anything you could share on sober dating and then balancing that with, like, getting out of your comfort zone.
Okay, so let's deal with sober dating first. So I am not dating. So, right, I'm married. But I certainly have friends that are single, and they're like, how the heck do you do this? You know, like, how do you put up a profile on a dating website? And like, do you have to say you don't, like, it's all of those things. And if it were me, and I'm 4 years sober, so I'm coming at it from, if it were me, first of all, in that context, and having 4 years behind me, and I'm out about my sobriety just because of what I do. So I'm in a bit of a unique situation here, but if it were me, in a dating profile, I wouldn't mention it. I would say, like, you know, you have the options, and because I've had this conversation with many of the women that are in She Walks Canada, there are the options to put what your likes and dislikes, you know, like social drinking or drugs or whatever, like, fill that stuff out appropriately. But for example, like, for right now, I have zero problem going and meeting my girlfriends for a drink. I just don't drink the 12%, right. But I still go to the restaurant. I still go to the wherever it is that we go, and they may have a glass of wine, but I will have some signature mocktail situation. So I still say I go for drinks because I'm actually, that's what I'm actually doing. And if somebody has an issue with me not putting 12% in, then that's on them. That's not on me. I still want to party. I still want to, you know, go out and be social. So I'm still doing all the things. I just don't do it with 12%. And so I just don't think that's something to draw attention to in my dating profile. If that was me, I wouldn't do that. But that's hypothetical, number one. I'm 4 years sober, and I'm out about what I do for a living. So I don't know. But I wouldn't put it in there, but I would make sure that the likes and dislikes are very clear. And if it's important to you to say I lead an alcohol-free lifestyle, I actually would probably say that because I do, and whatever that means. So I'm probably not the best person to ask about that, but that's what I would do. And we do have those conversations in our community. So,
and it's funny, yeah, because it just comes up all the time, right? Like it's like, what do I do? And I think you raise a good point. It's like there's this notion of attraction versus promotion, and so like you don't need to you don't need to announce everything to the world. I don't think there's anything wrong with that, to be honest, but like you don't need to come out and be like, oh, by the way, I'm so like that's not the first thing you need to bring up or mention. No. And to your point, it's like I can show up and go to the party and go on the date and do these things and make a choice to consume a different type of beverage, and it doesn't need to be on a billboard outside of the restaurant, right? Like, or to these people. I think a part of it for me is like saying it at some point before the first date, so that way it reduces a bit of the nerves because there's more that I've like announced going into it, and now I don't have to show up and like, oh, by the way, I don't drink, right? And it does have a way of creeping up sometimes into the conversation, I find. Even I had a work event the other day and everyone's like ordering a bottle of wine and asking like, do you want red or white? And then I say no. And then it's like, oh, okay, get another drink. What do you want? There's, cocktails. And I think having those NA options on the menu help now because like I can just like point to that. But even something you said made me think about like stigma around addiction. And I do think there's a lot of stigma, and I think that's some of the fear when, like, let's say I'm on these dating apps. It's like, I don't want to say it because people are going to make wild assumptions about what my sobriety means. And so then there's the part of me that does want to put it on the billboard outside of the restaurant and tell everyone I'm sober, because I'm also like a normal person with a good career and this great podcast and, having these conversations.
See, this is the thing, is that you could look at me and say one of two things. So you can either classify me as a third time married, unemployed, recovering alcoholic, because those things are all true. Or you can say I'm a successful startup entrepreneur. I have lived alcohol-free and thrive alcohol-free, and I'm taking every single woman along with me on that ride. And I'm not too worried about my financial future because I think that's going to take care of itself. So, however, those two people are the same person, and it's my responsibility to show up in the way that makes me comfortable. And I'm going to attract the people that are comfortable with that. We have to be sure that we represent ourselves in the way that we need to be seen and supported at that time. So, to your point, where you are at 1 month is very different from where you are at 1 year or 4 years or 6 months. Like, it's all different. So just be true to you. And if it's something you want to talk about, great. If it's something you don't want to talk about, great. Stay true to you.
Getting out of your comfort zone.
Oh. First of all, nothing good comes out of staying in your comfort zone. Nothing good comes out of staying in your comfort zone. When I learned that people are hardwired to be comfortable, not happy. I'm going to say one more time. Human beings are hardwired to be comfortable, not happy. And when I learned that, I was like, I'm like, okay, so right now, in whatever capacity, wherever I was in my life, I was scared to make change because I didn't know the other things, what my life would look like on the other side. And then I went ziplining for the first time. And I was with my daughter, who is completely fearless. And she's 6 going on, TED Talk, right? And so we go ziplining. I am freaking terrified of heights. Whose idea was this? And I'd never been ziplining before, and neither had she, but it was my responsibility as her mother to be sure she was safe, right? And so what ended up happening is ziplining has become a total metaphor for me. So when you go ziplining, you're wearing the harness, you're wearing the hard hat, and you know that before you go ziplining, you have these carabiners, the clips that you have to attach to the line right? And when the clips are successfully attached to the line, you will not fall to your death because you are attached to the thing, right? And what I learned in that experience, because I had been telling myself for a good decade that I am terrified of heights. What I learned is that I am not terrified of heights. I am terrified of not being able to ensure my safe arrival. And when I understood that when I attached my carabiners in whatever metaphoric way I needed to do that, if I made sure that I had my safety measures in place and I was attached to everything I needed to be attached to, I knew that I could get to the other side. As my 6-year-old is swinging across and she's already on the other side, no fear. So that was the thing. So getting out of your comfort zone, nothing good happens in the comfort zone. You just have to be sure that your carabiners are in place and you won't fall. You'll get to the other side. You may have to pull yourself if you don't make it all the way. You may have to shimmy all the way down. But wouldn't you rather go for the ride?
Yes. That resonates with me so much because I'm the type of person that wants to control everything. And I do think that sometimes you're like, it's just about making sure those things are in place and the things that you can't control, you're doing and making your best effort towards. And then everything else falls in place. And that's okay. Mm-hmm. Another common question that we get is, I guess, how do you balance old friendships? So for me, all of the friends that I had were drinking buddies. When I stopped drinking, I lost everyone. Plus, when I stopped drinking, that's when I separated from my fiance. So there's a lot of friendships wrapped up in that.
Yeah.
And then I had to start all over again at 31 years old and try and find community and make friends and all of that. So how do you maybe recommend people balance some of those old drinking relationships? Do you get rid of them? And then how do you even set out on seeking community?
Yeah. So I totally understand that. So when my drinking took a special turn, it was probably in 2011, and I had just moved across the country and to a city where I knew nobody. And or very few people, and so I had left my two best friends, or actually one best friend. The other one was living here, but she wasn't my best friend at the time. But anyway, so and so my relationships really that I developed in this city were drinking friends, because I needed something to do and I needed to escape this new life that I was trying to build. And so the relationships that I forged during that time were essentially drinking relationships. And so when I stopped drinking, I had been living in Toronto for 8 years. And by that time, my two best friends were living in Vancouver. And for me, the drinking buddies had to go, because I couldn't, all that we wanted to do is drink. I'm not going to continue that relationship. I can't drink. For me, right, I had to make the decision to stop. And it's a bit of a blessing, because in January I stopped drinking, and March COVID happened where nobody could see each other. And so while so many people say, oh, that must have been so hard, in a way it was a bit of a blessing, because I didn't have to justify why I wasn't drinking, because nobody was going out. So I had to let the drinking buddies go, because all those relationships were based around drinking, with conversations I never remembered having with people that I knew really nothing about, because I couldn't remember. So what's interesting is that my two closest friends, and we were partiers, the three of us, they don't drink either. And so whenever we do get together, and this was a conversation we had to have, because whenever we'd get together, we would go to all the same places that we would drink at. But then we found ourselves, none of us drinking anymore. We're like, why are we going to do that? So then we got an Airbnb on Vancouver Island and had, 5 days together, no husbands, no kids, no booze. It was epic. We brought in masseuses, and oh my God.
That sounds amazing.
That was amazing. So, but anyway, what ends up happening is when you do get into a community of other like-minded women, oh my God, Like, there are people all over the world that have pieces of my story from these meetings that you would go to. And what's so amazing about those bonds that are forged in the community of other sober women, and I'm sure you've experienced this too, there could be people that you spent 3 hours with on a call who you haven't talked to in 3 years. But if they phoned you, you would stop what you were doing, you would answer the call, and you would do what needs to be done. It is the weirdest thing. And most of the people that I've met in my alcohol-free life, I've never seen in person. But they are my inner circle. And you and I had this experience. You showed up in my kitchen, and in about 8 seconds flat, we were having a conversation that mattered, right?
Yeah.
Because that's what happens with people like us. Anybody who removes alcohol from your lives, you take one look at somebody who's also done the same thing, and you can have a conversation, and that conversation is meaningful. It's productive. You see each other eye to eye. Like, that is real, honest connection. So that, plus when we get clear and free, we emit a different vibe. And so the people that come into our lives are reflective of that vibe. So don't block that.
Yes. And that's been my experience. Like, the people I've met in sobriety, I could have only dreamed of those friendships and those connections. And I do have people similar to you where I met them online through the sober community,
Yeah.
and they've been completely 100% virtual friendships that I've never met in person.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't take away from that relationship one little bit. And I think that when I did my first year sober, I was like, man, all my friends are online and virtual, like this, and like, and I was like, oh, this isn't good enough. And these, no, what do you mean? Those, some of those relationships are some of the most fulfilling relationships that I have. So nothing to take away from that. But then I'd also say that there is something to be said for these in-person connections as well.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
You gotta get out and meet people.
Exactly. How are you living your full potential?
Okay, so so for me, I'm not living my full potential yet because it is continuing to reveal itself. And I do not believe that I am at my fullest. So within that context, okay, so to put things in perspective, the day I stopped drinking, I was in a job that I wasn't good at, that I didn't enjoy, where I wasn't making a lot of impact. I was an exhausted mother from parenting. I couldn't tell you what I valued. I was terribly out of shape, and I hated myself every day. This morning, I woke up, and it's been a week. I'll say that it's been a week, but today I had a conversation with my app development people, and I have created the first woman-centric app designed to help women overcome overdrinking. And today we discussed the app launch date because the app is now complete. I have launched a movement that has helped over 10,000 women in their journeys to overcome overdrinking through the services the platform provides, She Walks Canada. I hope that we would have 50 walks. We now have over 200 in 14 weeks. And I, again, to no surprise, had the most beautiful morning with my daughter because we are so totally connected eye to eye. And I asked her last night, what do you know for sure? Just for fun. I said, what do you know for sure? She said, Mom, I know that you'll love me forever. Oh. And so, sure, there's some things in my life that are challenging right now, but I would not change this situation right now for what it is, because it's only going to get better because I am getting better.
Talk about a gift of sobriety, that relationship. Can you tell us a bit about the app?
Yeah. I'm so excited. So the app is called the Uncovery app because not everybody needs recovery. And what I mean by that is that recovery, the word recovery, for so many people who have a problematic relationship with alcohol, they don't think they need it. They don't think they need treatment, rehab, all these kinds of things. And it's not for me to tell them what they need. It's for me to provide a platform where they feel they can identify and work through their own process. And I believe our path forward is not something we need to do over. I think our path forward is something we need to reveal to ourselves for the first time. And so the Uncovery is about the Uncovery Method, the Uncovery approach, the Uncovery app is about uncovering what we already know to be true. We just can't see it yet. And so the app is going to launch in 2024. And I talk about three things: sober curiosity, sobriety, the process of sobriety, and then the ultimate destination, alcohol-free living. And I do that through community coaching and connection. And so in the app, I answer the questions that Google can't. So it's really the emotional connection and the relationship that we have with alcohol. And that our relationship, while it is a relationship with alcohol, it is completely unrequited. And so we've got to identify why alcohol has the importance in our life that it does. And it's because we give it that power. And we've got to take that power back. And how do we do that? And that's what the app is about. So really, it's an empowerment app for women through the lens of living alcohol-free.
This is huge. Like, if I think back to almost 4 years ago when I started my sobriety journey, I searched and I'm a good researcher. Like, I searched the internet for an app for something. Like, the most I could find was a day counter. And those are good, right?
I got one too.
Yeah. But like, I obviously wanted and needed so much more than that. So I like what you're creating will help so many people. And
and the other thing about this app, which is different, and certainly I have never been somebody to say it's my way or the highway, because I don't believe that. I think we need to collect a constellation of supports that work for us. But what I have come to learn about the women that identify with my messaging is that these women do not need another stat. We know that it's terrible for us. We know that it can contribute to breast cancer. We know that if you drink too much when you're pregnant, it can affect your baby. So these are things that we know. And talking about the worst case scenario only distances people because they don't see themselves as that person. And this platform, this app, the Uncovery app, it addresses the emotional connection we have to ourselves and how to unravel our perception that we need alcohol to endure our lives. I have no interest in enduring. I want to enjoy my life, and that's what this is all about.
It's amazing. I can't wait for it to come out. How can people find you and stay in touch with you so they know about the release of the app and all of the other things that you're doing?
Yeah, and so you can find She Walks Canada on Instagram at She Walks Canada. You can sign up for the app at theuncoveryapp.com. And what's so great about right now is that it's set up that it's a wait list, and anybody who gets on the wait list will get it at a much cheaper price forever. So it will be offered at a cheaper price only for people that are on the wait list. And then after it launches, the price will change. And so to the She Walks Canada community, to people who are interested in this before it is released to the big public, there's a reward there. So
amazing.
Yeah.
Okay, good. And then you have your walks coming up. The launch is...
Yeah. So and then there's She Walks Canada, the walks. And so you can go to shewalkscanada.com, and on the community walks page you can register for the over 200 walks that are happening in multiple locations across North America. And so if you register on the walk, then you can find out the details when the walk is happening. You get reminder emails, your walk's coming up. You can meet your walk leader. And then you also get access to the private Facebook group where you can meet the community.
And they start St. Patrick's Day?
They start on St. Patrick's Day.
I love that.
I know. And then the entire year round, we have our professional-led group coaching calls. So we're not peer-led, we're professional-led on Sunday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. I lead on Thursday nights, yeah. It's awesome. Great.
I love that it's on St. Patrick's Day.
I know,
because
right?
It's also a bit of a like, yeah.
Green Beer Day. No,
yeah,
thanks.
Yeah, no, thank you. Is there anything that we didn't discuss that you want to discuss?
I would say that I never believed that I could stop drinking. I got to a point where I believed that this was just going to be my life. And all I can say is that if you have the courage to believe something else is possible, not only do you become possible, you become probable. And in the right community, you can realize that.